My wife looked me right in the eyes at her company's biggest event of the year. 500 people, chandelier lighting, open bar, the whole thing. And she introduced me to her boss with 4 words. He does contractor work. Not my name, not what I'd actually built, just contractor work. Like I was someone she'd hired to fix a leaky faucet and accidentally brought to the wrong event. I smiled. I shook the man's hand. I kept my mouth shut. Because here's what my wife didn't know that night. Her boss already knew exactly who I was. And what happened next in front of every single person she'd ever tried to impress, I could not have scripted it better if I tried.
My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 47 years old. I was born and raised in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 30 miles outside of Nashville. And I grew up the second son of a man who poured concrete for a living and a mother who stretched every dollar like it was made of rubber. We weren't the kind of family that talked about legacy or generational wealth. We talked about whether the truck would make it through another winter and whether we could afford new cleats for my brother's football season. What we had, though, was work ethic. My father had it. My grandfather had it. And somewhere along the way, it got into me so deep that I don't know how to turn it off. I started working construction at 17, summers, weekends, every spare hour. By 22, I had my contractor's license. By 26, I had my own crew. Small stuff at first. Residential remodels, additions, deck builds. Nothing glamorous. But I was obsessive about quality. Obsessive about showing up when I said I would, finishing what I promised, never cutting corners, even when the margin would have allowed it. And in the construction world, that kind of reputation travels. Quietly, steadily, like water finding its level. By 35, Marsh Building Group had 30 full-time employees and contract across Middle Tennessee. By 40, we crossed into commercial development, office parks, mixed-use retail. Eventually, a partnership with a regional developer out of Atlanta that changed the trajectory of everything I'd built. I don't say any of this to brag. I say it because you need to understand a gap, the enormous specific gap between who I actually was and who my wife had decided I was. Because Rachel saw something different when she looked at me. She saw a man in work boots. I met Rachel when I was 38. She was 34. She worked in corporate marketing for a mid-sized logistics company in Nashville. Sharp, polished, ambitious in the way that people who grew up without much become when they finally find a lane that fits them. I respected that about her. I understood it. She was funny when we met. Direct. She didn't seem to care that my hands were rough or that I drove a work truck. She said she liked that I was real. She said the men she dated before were all performance and no substance. We dated for a year and a half, and then we got married on a Saturday in October at a venue outside of Franklin, Tennessee. It was a good day. I think we were both genuinely happy. But what happened next completely changed everything. The shift in Rachel didn't happen overnight. It crept in the way cold air finds the gaps in a house. Slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you've been shivering for months. It started with her promotions. Rachel moved up fast at her company. She was good at her job, genuinely good. And over the first 4 years of our marriage, she went from senior marketing manager to director and eventually VP of brand strategy. And with each step up, something in how she saw our life together seemed to recalibrate. The first time I really noticed it, we were at her company's holiday party. Her 3rd year there. She was newly a director. And when she introduced me to her colleagues, I noticed she didn't say what I did. She just said my name and moved on. Later that night in the car, I asked her about it. She said, I just didn't want to have to explain it. Construction sounds like a lot. Sounds like a lot. I turned that phrase over in my mind for weeks. Then started getting more specific. Daniel, when we're at the Henderson dinner, can you not bring up the job site stuff? These are corporate people. They won't connect with it. You don't have to wear the jacket with the company logo. It looks like you came from work. Just let me handle the conversation tonight, okay? I know how these people think. Every event, every dinner, every professional gathering she brought me to, there was a briefing beforehand. Instructions. A list of things to be and things not to be. And every single time, without fail, she introduced me the same way. This is my husband, Daniel. He does contractor work. Not My husband Daniel, who runs a 40-person construction and development company. Not my husband Daniel, who just broke ground on a $12 million commercial project. Just contractor work, like I was a category, a checkbox, something to be acknowledged and immediately moved past. I want to be honest with you here because I think this part matters. I didn't fight back. Not really. I pushed back a couple of times early on, and the conversations that followed were so draining and so circular that eventually I just stopped. I told myself it didn't matter what people at her work events thought of me. I told myself it was her world, her career, her relationships, and I should let her navigate it the way she needed to. What I didn't let myself fully admit was this. Every time she introduced me that way, something in me got a little smaller. And I thought that was the worst part. I was wrong. The annual gala. That's where everything broke open. Rachel's company, Crestline Logistics, held their annual client appreciation gala every November at the Omni Nashville Hotel. It was their flagship event. 500 people, major clients, executive leadership, industry partners. Rachel had been co-chairing the event planning committee for the last 2 years, and this year as VP of brand strategy, it was essentially her night. Her vision, her execution, her moment. She'd been talking about it for months. I was proud of her, genuinely. Whatever had eroded between us, I still recognized what she'd built in her career, and I respected it. So when she asked me to come, I said yes without hesitation. I rented a proper tux, got a haircut, showed up looking like a man who understood the assignment. We walked in together. Rachel was electric that night, in her element, moving through the room like she'd been built for it. And for the first hour, I'll be honest with you, it felt like the early years. She was warm, she was alive, and she held my arm like she meant it. Then her CEO walked over. His name was Greg Whitmore. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of man who fills a room without raising his voice. He was with his wife and another couple I didn't recognize. Rachel lit up when she saw him. And then she turned to me, and I watched something shift in her eyes, just for a fraction of a second. And she said, "Greg, this is my husband, Daniel. He does contractor work." Same words, same tone, same efficient erasure. But this time something else happened. This time, the man standing next to Greg, the one I didn't recognize, turned and looked at me. And he said, "Daniel Marsh?" I looked at him. It was a man named Carter Webb. And my stomach dropped, not from fear, but from the sudden, dizzying recognition of what was about to happen. Carter Webb was the CEO of Webb Southern Development, the Atlanta-based firm I'd partnered with 8 months ago on the largest project of my career. A mixed-use development outside of Nashville, residential, retail, commercial space. A project that, when completed, would be the largest privately funded development in Rutherford County in 15 years. Carter and I had been in rooms together. We'd eaten meals together. We'd signed papers together. He was also, as I would learn in the next 30 seconds, one of Crestline Logistics' biggest clients. Carter extended his hand, not to Rachel, to me. He said, "I thought that was you. Daniel, what are you doing here?" Rachel looked between us with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Confused, unsteady, like a woman who had walked into a room she thought she knew and found the furniture rearranged. "My wife works here," I said. "She organized tonight's event." Carter looked at Rachel, then back at me, and I could see him processing, assembling the picture. And then he turned to Greg Whitmore, her CEO, and he said, "Greg, do you know who this man is? I want to pause the story here for a second, because what came next, I need you to understand what was happening inside me while it was happening outside me." When Carter started talking, when he started explaining to Greg Whitmore who I was and what Marsh Building Group had built, I wasn't feeling triumphant. Not yet. Not in that moment. What I was feeling was grief. Not for myself. For us. For the marriage. For the version of Rachel I'd married and the version standing next to me with white-knuckled composure while her CEO learned that her husband wasn't just a contractor. I had loved this woman. I still did. In the complicated, grief-stained way you love something you know is ending but can't yet let go of. And watching her face in that moment, the color draining, the careful social mask starting to slip, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt tired. I felt the weight of years of being managed and minimized and briefed and positioned and introduced like a liability. And I felt, underneath all of that, the strange and specific sadness of realizing that the person who was supposed to know you best had never actually tried. She had never asked me what I was building. In 9 years of marriage, not once had she sat down and said, "Tell me about the business. Tell me what you're working on. Tell me what this all means to you." She saw the work boots, and she stopped looking. That's what broke my heart, if I'm being completely honest with you. Not the public moment, not the Gala, or Carter Webb, or Greg Whitmore. The 9 years of incuriosity. The 9 years of a woman sleeping next to a stranger she decided wasn't worth understanding. I had let it happen. That was on me too, but it was ending tonight. Carter Webb talked for about 4 minutes. 4 minutes doesn't sound like long, but in a quiet circle of 5 people at a company gala, 4 minutes is an eternity. He talked about the Rutherford County development. He talked about the scope of it, the investment, the timeline, the projected economic impact. He talked about Marsh Building Group's reputation in Middle Tennessee and how Webb Southern had pursued the partnership specifically because of it. He mentioned a number, the contract value. I watched Greg Whitmore's expression travel from polite attention to genuine surprise to something that looked remarkably like recalibration. And I watched Rachel. She stood very still, the way a person stands when they've lost the ability to calculate what move to make next. When Carter finished, Greg Whitmore turned to me, not to Rachel, and said, "Daniel, I have to be honest with you. I had no idea. Rachel has never mentioned." He caught himself, looked at her briefly, then back at me. "I'd love to find time to sit down with you this week, if you're open to it. We have some infrastructure needs coming up that I think you'd find interesting." I said I'd be happy to. Carter clapped me on the shoulder and moved back toward his table. And then there were 3 of us. Greg excused himself with a grace that told me he understood something had just happened that he wasn't supposed to fully witness. He shook my hand warmly, nodded at Rachel, and walked away. And it was just her and me, standing in the middle of the event she had spent months building, surrounded by 500 people, in a silence that was so loud I could hear it. She said quietly, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" And I looked at her, my wife, this woman I'd spent 9 years building a life beside. And I said just as quietly, "You never asked, Rachel." She didn't have an answer for that, because there wasn't one. Rachel and I drove home separately that night. She stayed to finish the event. She's professional even when she's falling apart. I'll give her that. And I drove back to the house alone. I sat on the back porch for a long time. My dog, a 7-year-old lab, mix named Scout, came and leaned against my leg the way he does. Dogs always know. I thought about my father, about him coming home after 12-hour days smelling like concrete and sweat, sitting at the kitchen table, eating dinner, asking us about our days. Never once making us feel like his exhaustion was our problem. Never once needing to be seen as something bigger than what he was. He was a good man, a real man, and he taught me, without ever saying it directly, that your worth is not determined by who acknowledges it. Rachel and I are no longer together. The separation happened quietly, about 3 months after the gala. No explosion, no dramatic confrontation. Just 2 people sitting across a kitchen table admitting, finally, what had been true for a long time, that we had stopped being what the other person needed, and that holding on was costing us both more than letting go. It was painful. It still is sometimes. 9 years is 9 years. But here's what I know now that I didn't fully know before that night at the Omni. Shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's story is not love. It's surrender. I had convinced myself that staying quiet, staying small, letting Rachel manage and position and minimize me was somehow respectful. That I was being the bigger person. That I was supporting her career, her world, her comfort. What I was actually doing was disappearing. And here's the thing about disappearing. Nobody notices until something makes them look. Carter Webb made Rachel look. And what she saw wasn't the contractor she'd filed me under in her mind. It was a man she had never bothered to actually see. That's not his fault. That's not my fault. That's just the truth of what happens when you stop being curious about the person you chose. I met with Greg Whitmore the following Tuesday. It was a good conversation. We found some common ground. I don't know yet where it leads, and I'm not in a rush to find out. I still drive the work truck. I still wear boots more days than not. I still show up to my job sites in person because I believe in knowing what you're building with your own eyes. And I still introduce myself the same way I always have when someone asks. My name's Daniel Marsh. I build things. That's always been enough. It just took me 9 years and one gala to believe it. If this story touched something real in you, if you've ever been the person in the room that someone else was too busy to actually see, I want to hear from you. Drop in the comments. You're not alone. And if you know someone who needs this reminder today, that they are more than how they've been introduced, share this with them. Take care of yourself. I'll see you in the next one.